It's Sunday, June 8, 2025. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minutenews. Our guest today is an activist, public defender, and co-founder of Partners for Justice, providing collaborative support services to people facing criminal charges while helping public defenders protect people from incarceration. Emily Galvin Almanza, welcome back.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's been a crazy week. Certainly Thursday was one of the most insane news days in my lifetime. We'll talk about the end of the Trump and Musk bromance a little bit later, but I want to focus first on this so-called One Big Beautiful Bill. This is the bill that passed the House last month and now faces major challenges in the Senate, including from holdouts like Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky, who opposes the bill. Elon Musk, of course, has been shitposting, to choose a phrase, about it and saying how completely inappropriate it is. So we're not entirely sure where his allegiances lie. But ultimately, this bill is designed to reduce taxes for the very wealthy and somehow at the same time take services away from the very poorest and most vulnerable. This is a Donald Trump dream. But for everybody else, this could spell disaster.
So the thing that bothers me about this bill, there are many things that bother me, but they can really be summed up under an umbrella of this is not what most people actually want, regardless of party, regardless of ideology. If you ask the average person on the street, hey, would you love to give Elon Musk and Mark Cuban and Bill Gates and whoever else a huge tax break and have people in your community lose their health care and maybe kids can't get school lunches anymore? Most people would say, absolutely not. That's not what we want. Kitchen table issues are people want to be able to buy groceries, put food on the table, get assistance if they need it, if they're unable to work. They want to be able to have access to health care that doesn't bankrupt them. These are long-standing American desires, and it's embarrassing that they've had to be long-standing. But this bill essentially flips everything people want on its head. And from my perspective, as someone who specializes in public safety, it's an especially big disaster. I'll give you some hard numbers on this. When Medicare and Medicaid were expanded, there was research done on the trickle-out effects of expanding access to health care for very, very low-income families. And the finding was that in regions where healthcare access was expanded, crime dropped. And not like 2%, 3%. Crime dropped by as much as 30%. So what do you think's going to happen when we roll that back and take people's health care away?
This was a study done, a paper that suggested that expanded Medicaid insurance reduced police arrests, particularly drug-related arrests. And it was combined with research that showed the harmful health consequences of chronic policing in disadvantaged communities, greater insurance coverage, which created new avenues for individuals to seek care and receive treatment. The studies have been done, as you rightly say, but Donald Trump is the wrong person to even appeal to his good nature for any of this, isn't he? I mean, we really genuinely have the wrong people in office to want to even negotiate on a topic such as this.
Yeah, you'd have to care how federal decisions impact ordinary people. If you cared about how federal decisions impact ordinary people, you would, for example, let's say you were going into government with the desire to cut government a great deal, you would do so with a lot of analysis and thought and very surgically and carefully. You probably wouldn't crash through every agency trying to demolish it as fast as possible. So fast, in fact, that you fired people who were working on protecting us from like Ebola or nuclear accidents and then have to desperately rehire them when you can't find them because you don't have their email addresses anymore. I mean, forethought has not been a signature of this administration. But I'm not as much concerned with whether Donald Trump cares about this. I know he doesn't care about this. This is not going to affect his personal family, so it doesn't matter to him. We, though, need to care about this because public safety affects every single one of us. And it doesn't matter if you're not a person who has government health care, if you have private insurance through your employer, this still matters to you because when you walk home at night after government health care has been cut back, you are less safe when people don't have access to the medicines they need to do well. Restricting access to mental health care, substance use care, these are things which fundamentally impact all of our public safety. So our pure self-interest should require us to care about them and also be canny about how and when our government tries to take these things away. You know, one trick in this bill is that the bill tries to delay a lot of its most negative effects so that people won't immediately feel the impact right when the bill passes. They might feel it a few years out. So they spend a few years thinking, deceived, that Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill hasn't cost them anything, when in fact, when the effects hit and we see crime rise, we see safety go down, the next person in office may field the blame.
And this is a trait of the Trump regime, is to cherry pick the timeline and to time shift. And it was Obama that said recently at the DNC, wasn't it? You know, of course his economy looked good when he was in the first time because that was my economy. And this is the problem with the public sector, is that there is a delay. It could be a year, it could be 2 years, it could be 3 years, depending on which sector you're talking about. But as to your point, the closure of USAID without Trump really even knowing what it was, they were literally taking the letters off of the building. Symbolic. That was symbolic. And to me, this all talks to authoritarianism. This is flexing muscles. And this is why I think it's so hard to kind of renegotiate on things like this in the bill, because to him, everything that you're describing comes under the banner of socialism. And that's something that they've been trying to steer well clear of.
It's so funny to me because really, at the end of the day, what matters the most is the public's ability to fully understand this.
Yes.
The public's ability to track, okay, murder rates really low this year. Why are they low? Because of policies we had in place 3 years ago. Things take a long time to have an effect. And for the public right now, tracking the impact that they are going to experience next is going to be really, really tricky because, as you point out, this administration is very canny about timelines. But also just wrapping one's head around the difference between the labels we are given and the things we actually want can be tricky. You know, it feels like every other day, somewhere floating on the internet, I come across some sort of post where someone's like, get the government out of my Medicaid. Or,
right.
You know, even more to the point, we've got to make these big companies worker owned. The only way to save us from socialism is to make sure that ordinary people control our businesses. And there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
But I think this sort of boogeyman socialism, socialist policies is subverting a lot of people's actual views, which are much more, let's say, democratizing than they might think they are.
I agree entirely that people don't realize how kind of lefty they really are inside. It's like, I think we're born that way. And actually, all of this kind of right-wing and far-right rhetoric is really just born of corruption. It's like, how do you stiff the system? How do you profit the most? But what it does is it removes the humanity from everything. And I think that really is, I'm starting to see a kind of more of a clear divide as to the people that will continue to follow Trump as his house of cards collapses. And it does seem to be collapsing in many ways. We saw it with the new German chancellor, with him in the Oval Office a few days ago, who literally had to describe to Donald Trump what D-Day was and to educate him. And Trump is one of these people that is very good at maneuvering himself so he doesn't look like a total idiot. But for those of us that see through that, he's a total idiot. And so this is a problem, because as far as I see it, I don't think he or even the people in his orbit that are working on these policies have any concept of what you're describing about how policies have a knock-on effect year after year. Is it even on their radar, let alone in their wheelhouse?
Oh, I think it very much is. I wouldn't underestimate the current administration at all. I think that the troubling thing to me is that none of these cuts, which will meaningfully really hurt working families, are accidental. They're carefully planned.
Well, that was going to be my next question. Is it cruelty? Is it evil? Is that what is behind this, if it's not stupidity?
Here's the thing. I try very hard never to attribute to evil what can be attributed to a lack of information or a very, very different moral orientation.
Yes.
Here's what I mean. I personally believe that for me to live my best life, I have to help as many people as I can. Not everyone believes that. There are many in government who think that governmental help is dangerous for people, and that extending a helping hand when a family is down on their luck destroys their independence and doesn't foster their ability to take care of themselves. And you hear this rhetoric a lot, right? I heard it on the news this morning that they want to get working age people off of public assistance programs. Well, never mind that our disability system is a nightmare and that there are many people who are working age but not actually able to work for one reason or another. Never mind that with the same breath, everyone's talking about replacing all our jobs with AI. Like, never mind that we're walking this thing of, y'all have to work. Oh, but there's not going to be any jobs for you.
Yeah.
I understand that the other side just views what help is differently. Now, that being said, that cannot excuse the level of evil incompetence that we have often seen. For example, you can believe whatever you want about whether welfare helps people or doesn't. But when you separate a family and you throw someone into a foreign prison for life without having double checked your facts or even provided any facts or evidence at all, because your goal is to simply deport 3,000 people a day rather than to get anything right, that is no longer within the bounds of anyone's moral compass.
I want to come on to the immigration conversation a little bit later. But first, let's continue talking about this bill, because there have been so many false claims made, like the bill will reduce the deficit by 1.6 trillion. Well, the economists are saying it'll actually add somewhere between 2.6 and $5 trillion. Another false claim is taxes will rise by 68% if the bill does not pass. And then the Medicaid false claim was that only Medicaid cuts in the bill target waste, fraud, and abuse. Maybe we should start there with the deception about Medicaid and the way that they use waste, fraud, and abuse, which is kind of a Doge phrase, isn't it? That's kind of where that started, about 6 months ago. Doge didn't find any waste, for fraud, and abuse. As we saw, it was ideological. They just basically wanted to take away things that, as conservatives, they didn't really agree with, such as USAID. But in the case of Medicaid, as I read it, and tell me if I'm wrong, but claiming that there is waste, fraud, and abuse is just a really stealth-like way to extract any kind of support from people who might have filled in a form incorrectly or haven't responded to an email or something like that.
Absolutely. I think people who've never utilized these systems really underestimate how challenging these systems are to use. I'm an attorney. I went to school for all the years and then some. I personally have attempted to help people navigate these processes and found it incredibly challenging. The questions can be vague. Getting them wrong is very easy. You need a deep amount of expertise to know what these questions are really asking and not to accidentally mess it up in a way that will get you knocked out of the process.
Yeah.
So not only is the process challenging, but the process is also a challenging process imposed upon people who are already struggling. By the time you're applying for help from the government, things are not going well. You are probably simultaneously dealing with housing challenges. Obviously, you're looking for work and can't find it. That's why you're applying. The healthcare question may be something that you're navigating while dealing with a chronic illness, something that can make it really challenging to find care. You may have been laid off and may have a condition which makes it, some people even have a hard time finding a job with a chronic illness, not because of inability to work, but because the subtext is that their next employer doesn't want to pay the premiums that it'll cost to cover their chronic illness. There's all sorts of nefariousness and complexity in these things people have to navigate, not to mention trying to be a parent while navigating these processes. And oh, by the way, if you want to call somebody up and get help, hey, I don't understand this question on the form. Can you help me answer it? Are these systems that answer the phone? Are there people available to help you? Is this office something that's only open between 2:37 and 4:45 on Wednesdays? More often than not, yeah, we're dealing with Kafka-esque, maddening processes, and guess what makes that worse? Firing the people who work in these agencies, whose job it is to help people navigate the systems. If you want to look for waste, fraud, and abuse, the place to start is not with hardworking career civil servants who have dedicated their lives to helping these systems work better for ordinary people like me and you. There are a lot of other places to start. What about all these contracts the federal government is creating with groups like Geo Group for huge expansions of the prison system? Now, let's see. All of these contracts tend to be very expensive and have a lot of line items built in for all manner of care that they are claiming they are going to give to the people confined there. Do you know anyone who's gone to prison and had a good experience getting access to food or medicine? Because I don't. What we hear coming out of immigration detention centers mirrors this completely, which is that these contracts are padded to high heaven with spending and not actually resulting in anything good happening for anyone on the ground.
Well, they are all for profit as well. And that
exactly
ultimately is where the problem lies. And the immigration centers are at 125% capacity, and people are complaining that they're starving. I don't expect to see that change anytime soon, especially, as you say, if they're seeking to arrest 3,000 people a day. So this problem is widespread, but it's at kind of both ends of the system. Not to mention people who are compromised emotionally and mentally. I mean, even filling in a form for Medicaid, if you're depressed, trying to hit the deadline, there aren't really any allowances for humanity. And again, that is for people that don't understand the difference between having a MAGA Republican government versus a Democratic one. Whatever your political views, humanity is one of those big differences.
I think so, and also just an acknowledgement that government should deliver a service that people actually find valuable. This is where I sort of come down on it. We're all paying in. I give half my paycheck to the government. The question for every family is, what do you want to get back for that? Do you want to pay half your paycheck so that somebody with a lot more money than you doesn't have to pay half of theirs? Or do you want to pay half your paycheck so that should you ever fall in hard times, not only will you be easily and seamlessly able to get what you need to keep food on the table for your kids, but your neighbor will as well. And people all throughout your neighborhood will be able to keep shopping at corner stores, keep getting groceries, keep the economy alive, even if we experience really hard times as a nation. Do you want the guy down the hall to be able to get access to his mental health medication? You probably do. You're probably willing to pay a few pennies out of the taxes you pay to have something like that happen. What about education for your kids? I mean, we are a country that wants to prize education. We all want our kids to have the best education money can't buy. If we all pay in and our government actually directs those dollars towards our kids' schools, we can have schools in which our kids aren't just well fed, they are well educated. They can compete in the job market, not just domestically, but internationally, right? Like if you ask people, what do you want your tax dollars to go for? Who's going to say, I would like 15 more bombers, but you don't have to buy lunch for the kids at my kid's school? Nobody's going to say that. Yes, we want a strong, healthy defense, but I don't really believe that anyone, regardless of ideology, would sacrifice getting something back for the money they put in.
Meanwhile, they're deconstructing the Department of Education. That is a priority. And this woman who formerly led the World Wrestling Association is responsible for this and was having to answer questions a few days ago and literally couldn't answer anything, didn't know anything about the department that she is set to shut down in time. This is and then of course there's the whole Harvard debate, of course, where, Trump is at war with the universities. So they are attacking education from both ends. It seems to me that when you talk to people on a one-on-one level, they would all agree with you, I think, even staunch Republicans, if you get them in a room on their own. Because hopefully people have a heart and a soul, and they recognize that, this is a wealthy nation and that there is enough to go round. But politics has become so tribal that it seems that when you get people in groups, whether it be at a Trump rally or at a Tupperware party, I mean, either way, there is this momentum that is like, yeah, well, I work hard and why should I give them my earnings? And I found this quite shocking when I first came to the US. Culturally, it's so different to Europe. There is kind of socialism is kind of built into European politics. We call it a social democracy. And healthcare for all is, we don't even talk about it, it's just normal. But here these things are seen as exceptions and entitlements and all of these things. How much does the culture need to change for people to step outside of those tribal silos?
I think one thing that needs to happen in terms of culture change is coherence on values across tribal boundaries. I'll give you an example that is controversial. Let's talk about the detention of folks who are charged with crimes after January 6th. There is so much hurt on the right about the way those people were treated, especially about the fact that many of them were held in solitary confinement. Now, solitary confinement is an issue that is obviously very close to my heart. Internationally, the way we do solitary confinement here in the US, which is throwing people in the hole for very long periods of time, that is considered torture internationally.
Yeah.
Other places don't do that. It can obviously destroy someone's mental health and harm them in ways that are irreparable. So I, too, agree with my friends who have very different political views than me, who vote very differently than me, that we need to talk about bail. We need to talk about pretrial release. We need to talk about not holding people in jail who are not genuinely a risk to the community. We need to talk about more people fighting their charges from home. And we need to talk about ways our system can create accountability that isn't just punishment. And we also need to talk about not throwing people in the hole in ways that destroy their mental health and are absolutely inhumane. Now, when I talk to MAGA friends, and I do have MAGA friends. I like open discourse. I invite it.
Same.
We can agree about this. I would like to see more of them come out for that issue as it pertains to my clients who were not accused on January 6th and who do not reflect the demographics of the people who were. I would also like to see Democrats who've taken a stand on solitary confinement, police abuse, bail reform, all of that. I'd like to see them acknowledge that for this highly politicized group of people, we cannot have an ideological set aside, that we all need to agree that wrong is wrong. And I think starting to dismantle these highly charged factual scenarios to get to the root moral through lines underneath is a vital step in shifting our culture, because I think that's how we build credibility with each other. When I say, you know what, you're right on that one. Let's talk about that. And I'm right on this other one. Let's talk about the one I'm right on too. That's where we begin. It's very hard without public education because, of course, that's where we learn to navigate difference, right? Like as children, that's where we learn to have a fight with somebody and talk it through and come out on the other side with a better understanding of each other. And if we don't encounter difference, difficulty, if we don't encounter things that make us uncomfortable and have to work through that, we don't have the skills as adults to bring about the kind of cultural change I'm talking about.
It does seem like we need to re-educate the nation in a way. It's almost as if a decade of Trumpism is like a pox that has infected people, like a virus far worse than COVID. It's long Trumpism, I guess we could call it, where you are, these conversations tend to be put to one side because what he brings to the table is so excessive and explicit and inappropriate that it acts as a distraction.
Yeah.
And I had this feeling about January 6th that by inciting that insurrection and that violence on that day, he's almost poisoned public dissent for Democrats. Because in this moment, there is obviously a bit of a leadership vacuum for the Democrats, and people are struggling. They're like, I want to be able to push back. I want to be able to rise up. There have been some epic peaceful protests organized, and including on June 14th when Trump's having his military parade / birthday party. But, and tell me what you think on this, just the fact that the protest that became the riot that was incited by Trump, that then resulted in people being thrown into jail, as you describe, and now since pardoned, ironically, is like a stain on public protest. I think it has affected people's desire to get involved, or to push back, or to rise up even, which is really necessary when you have an authoritarian regime running the country.
Yeah, no regime under which 3% of the population, just 3%, has sustainedly engaged in protest has survived that. It doesn't actually take that many people. I think Americans, you know, the Europeans look askance at us a lot. Like, why aren't you guys flipping over some cars? Like, the French would be lighting things on fire. They're very good at lighting things on fire.
Yeah.
There's a contextual difference, which is that we live in a country with massively harsher criminal penalties for things like that.
For criminal damage, even. Yeah.
For criminal damage, yeah. We live in a country with very scary policing in many places where a person might have done nothing wrong and still be physically harmed, sprayed with chemical weapons, shot with bullets or rubber bullets, which are still not by any means safe and can kill people. You know, we live in a very different context of violence than much of Europe. Additionally, we live under greater economic precarity. We don't have the same kind of social safety net. You know, I think whenever we talk about protests, people are talking about marching in the streets, and marching in the streets is incredibly important. But not shopping and not going to work is also very effective. Like,
I was going to say, it requires a day off.
Yeah,
that's
people
the
have
problem.
Massively more economic power.
Yeah.
They have the power to grind our economy to a halt, should they choose to do so. It's obviously risky for many people because we live in a country without a safety net where if you don't have a job, you don't have health insurance. I mean, we just talked about this entirely terrifying withdrawal of certain forms of public health aid. But in that context, it's just much harder for Americans to navigate public protest. That being said, some of the most exciting forms of democracy I've seen recently are ordinary people going to town halls to give their elected officials what for. You know, they always say, call your elected officials. It doesn't always feel very useful when you're like leaving a voicemail for somebody or like texting them your feelings. But when you get to go to a town hall, I watched the good people of my home state of Iowa at a town hall recently, shortly after the Abrego Garcia case was in the news. And I remember this fantastic Iowan talking to his Republican elected official saying in the loudest voice I've ever heard, when are you going to bring that guy back from El Salvador? And I got to say, like, that wasn't about ideology. That was about right and wrong. That was about, you got it wrong. You better fix the thing you got wrong. And because people showed up and demonstrated their anger to their elected officials, I think we saw an actual impact in the way those elected officials supported or didn't support issues related to that. Is it small? Yes. Is it enough? No. But I do think that people underestimate how many different ways there are to show up, and we should all probably consider greater options.
But we need to know about it, so we need to hear about it. So the press need to cover it more and talk about it. I mean, the protests that have gone on got very little national news coverage, a little bit of local news coverage. And I pieced together all the visuals I could find of protests for 5 Minute News channel. And it got a huge audience because people were like, we need to see this. It was very incentivizing to see that other people who feel the same as you have actually stepped outside their home and rather than be keyboard warriors have engaged with the reality of it. I do get a sense, though, that Trump is almost waiting for there to be some kind of public discourse so he can send in the feds, the National Guard, and, declare martial law. Do you think there's any truth to that? And is there a fear of that?
I'm a lawyer. Of course there's a fear of that. I mean, I think that we don't live in a world of shared informational reality anymore. Yeah. You can have a huge, completely peaceful protest. But if you have a couple of people with badges saying it wasn't peaceful and throwing people on the ground and starting a very dangerous situation, absolutely someone in the federal government could say, you see, this is insurrection and now we need to invoke the Insurrection Act. That's not a reason not to do it, because we live, one blessing of our modern world is that everything for the most part is filmed. And I will say that if our administration wants to invoke the Insurrection Act, they're going to. Whether people come out by the hundreds or by the millions, if they choose to, they're going to. The power of people demonstrating their beliefs publicly and speaking their minds publicly is not about controlling whether or not this administration takes terrifying next steps. We can't actually control that. I do think, though, it's about increasing political engagement. Like, a third of us didn't vote. And I think that we no longer live in a time when political silence or political acquiescence is acceptable. Acquiescence has life or death consequences for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. But I think there is something about demonstrating the scale at which people show up and say, yes, we are invested peacefully. And I want to be clear, peacefully. I'm a criminal defense attorney. Please do not commit any crimes. Not even the little crimes. Don't do any crimes, no matter how small, while protesting. And don't take your phone and write someone's phone number on your arm in Sharpie. But there's a lot of tips. Peaceful protest, though, as a demonstration of a cultural shift towards political engagement is incredibly valuable. And I do hope we see more of it.
And the vote really is at the heart of our democratic rights. And as you described, with a third of people not voting, that was a level of apathy that really surprised me, because I thought that people might recognize that Trump coming back was a great threat, not just to America, but to the rest of the world. But no one seemed to get that memo. Or if they did, they didn't think that their vote would make any difference. So I haven't yet heard from the Democrats or anybody really that the differential to keep this authoritarian regime from winning forever after, and Trump certainly will not be leaving the White House anytime soon. He certainly he wouldn't leave even if he lost. But that the vote is really the kind of last opportunity that you have to make change.
Well, it's not just the last opportunity. I mean, what bugs me about not voting, I understand that there are people who, for whatever reason, simply cannot bring themselves to vote for either presidential candidate. I do not feel that way. I agree with you that this administration has demonstrated the degree to which it is a global threat. However, even accepting that my view is not universal, there are so many other people on that ballot that matter. I mean, if you want to live in a jurisdiction where your elected representative, when you call up with a local problem, helps you solve it. If you get sent to a foreign prison without due process, if you want your elected official to get on a plane and come down there and try to bring you back to your family, you better vote for Congress and the Senate.
Right.
And more than that, if you want, let's say, a world in which you can march in peaceful protest, and even if somebody lies and says that you were not peaceful and throws you on the ground, but there's a video showing that you were engaged in peaceful protest, if you want a local prosecutor who will dismiss the charges against you and make sure that you do not have your life ruined or yourself taken away from your family because of allegations like that, if you want that local prosecutor instead of the one who rubber stamps whatever the police say, you better vote for local DAs. If you want the kind of police officer who, when someone is filming federal action in their community, reminds the federal agents on the ground, as I saw last week, no, this person has a right to film. They are on public property. They are not interfering with your investigation. If you want a cop who says, yes, you have a right to do what you're doing, these are your constitutional rights, and I stand for them, you better vote for your local sheriff races. I mean, like, why would people cede power when people hold so much power, especially in the local races that dramatically impact our lives every day, not just every once in a while?
And some of these high-profile cases, some names have become part of the modern vernacular. Remeza Öztürk, Abrego Garcia, as you described, Mahmoud Khalil. I mean, these names meant nothing a few months ago, and now they literally stand for a level of racism and Nazism almost that is permeating this authoritarian administration. Do you think that these stories that we are hearing and seeing and witnessing, some of whom the courts have eventually supported, are going to make a difference to people's engagement?
I certainly do think so. Because, I mean, the word unprecedented really doesn't do this justice.
Yeah.
Like, this is a country in which our First Amendment right to free speech is deeply ingrained in our souls. We have fought some big fights about this. We have allowed truly abhorrent speech because it is speech in this country, and we have stood proudly by people's right to share views that we find abhorrent. The fact that we are now living in a country where a young woman who wrote, as far as I can tell, a completely mild op-ed.
Well, she contributed to it. She didn't even write it. She wrote it with a whole bunch of people.
Yeah, and when I say mild, I understand that, like, there are people who might powerfully disagree with her views.
Yes.
But the point is that she didn't express them in a way that it was even unprofessional.
No.
I mean, nobody in America should be confined in a cell because of an op-ed. I don't care what your op-ed says. I mean, there's like, there's certain rules in the law about, like, inciting people to violence in specific ways that you cannot cross. I get that.
But they called her a national security threat. I mean, this was the discrepancy. I mean, we're talking about Remeza Öztürk. If you saw her, the sweetest, most gentle person, it was unfortunate that she was wearing a headscarf, because ultimately that was the reason why they grabbed her.
No, I think it's more than that. It's not that simple. It's, if you are a government who wants to suppress dissent, then you need to show that you are willing to take people's liberty away for their views.
So they used her as an example.
I do think so, yeah. I mean, yeah. I think that the conflict is incredibly powerfully painful for a lot of people. And so folks who are speaking out on an issue that bears so much emotional weight on all sides makes them an easy target in a certain way.
Yeah.
Because one side or the other can be inflamed. And that's the problem, again, with the polarization we see in this country, is that when more and more topics become topics on which you can divide people and you can get away with hurting people because the other side is inflamed and behind you and your extreme actions, we lose sight of our North Star, which is that we, as an American people, have agreed amongst ourselves that we have the right to views that differ from one another. And we have the right to not be punished for our views, so long as those views do not transmute into violent action. And how do we decide whether those views have crossed a line? We have to have the most beautiful thing in the world, which is due process. And something that I really love, this is again about, the power of the American citizenry. When we say due process, we don't mean like some guy that you don't know gets to decide. Sometimes that's the case. Sometimes a judge gets to make a decision on a case. But often it's we the people who decide. Abraham Lincoln is often quoted as saying that the most important civic service in this country is not voting. It's jury service. Because that is where we the people get to decide where our moral lines are. Is this thing actually wrong, or is it not wrong? Is this violence, or is this speech? Where's the line? It's not in someone else's hands. It's in your hands if you show up for jury duty. And that's what we risk having taken away. When we say that the administration is trying to take away due process, they're not just trying to curtail the ability of judges to make free decisions. They're trying to take literally your right to define your moral boundaries within your community away.
A grand jury decided that Donald Trump was a criminal, and that one, unfortunately, seemed to get overlooked eventually as well. We'll take a quick break, but I want to come back and talk about the travel ban that has been extended, as well as research that Donald Trump is also trying to curtail, and finally the fallout between Musk and Trump. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. If you've ever searched your own name or address in Google, it's shocking to find how many results have your personal information. And it's not by chance. Data brokers and people search sites collect your personal information, your name, address, phone number, financial information, income, and hundreds of other records. They sell and share it publicly without your consent. But Incogni is here to put an end to that. It hunts down these unethical sites and gets your information removed from the places that expose your private data. You don't have to email anyone, fill out any forms, or jump through hoops. They handle the entire process for you. Incogni is also continuously monitoring to see if your data is put back onto these databases, requesting repeated removals. This way, keeping them off forever, so you get way less spam calls, spam emails, and get more peace of mind. And best of all, you can cancel any time, and they offer a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can get it completely risk-free. Right now, you can get 60% off an annual plan by going to incogni.com and use code WEEKEND. That's incogni.com/weekend and use code WEEKEND at checkout. Take your personal data back with Incogni. Get 60% off an annual plan at incogni.com/weekend and use code WEEKEND at checkout. When you start a podcast, it seems like you have to figure it out all by yourself. Scripts, setup, filming schedule, logos. It can be super overwhelming, and every day seems to introduce a new decision that needs an answer. When you're starting off with something new, it seems like your to-do list keeps growing every day with new tasks, and that list can start to begin to overrun your life. So finding the right tool that not only helps you out, but simplifies everything can be such a game changer. And for millions of businesses, that tool is Shopify. Shopify is the e-commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, and 10% of all e-commerce in the US, from household names like Mattel and Gymshark to brands just getting started. You can get started with your own design studio with hundreds of ready-to-use templates. Shopify helps you build a beautiful online store to match your brand's style. Accelerate your content creation. Shopify is packed with helpful AI tools that write product descriptions, page headlines, and even enhance your product photography. Get the word out like you have a marketing team behind you. Easily create email and social media campaigns wherever your customers are scrolling or strolling. And best yet, Shopify is your commerce expert with world-class expertise in everything from managing inventory to international shipping to processing returns and beyond. If you're ready to sell, you're ready for Shopify. Turn your big business idea into with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/weekend. Go to shopify.com/weekend. Shopify.com/weekend. And we're back on The Weekend Show with Emily Galvin Almanza. I'm Anthony Davis. The Trump regime has delivered its latest blow to vaccines, cancelling a nearly $600 million contract to the drug maker Moderna that was intended to develop a shot for humans against bird flu. There's also been a cut to research on HIV. And this is something that you actually posted about on your social media feed. As I read this, and tell me if I'm being too simplistic and naive, but I think that the Trump administration would associate HIV with gay people, and therefore they don't want to fund that because they don't care much for the gay people. Is there any truth to that?
It's a depressing read, but I can't speak to whether there's truth on it.
Well, they are from the 80s. I mean, that's they're very much from the 80s.
Somebody needs to rewatch Angels in America.
Yeah.
I think in general, this administration doesn't care about things that don't impact the people in the administration personally.
Right.
And I think this certainly falls into that bucket. But it's also, this larger turn away from research and the development of new medicines, because it's not just HIV, it's incredibly promising cancer research that's getting cut. These are illnesses which affect millions of people. It's research into pandemic preparedness. That's why I tweeted about the bird flu vaccine, is that, bird flu is percolating. We have no idea if and when it could become a problem, just like we didn't know if and when coronaviruses could become a problem. Under the Obama administration, actually, they had drilled a preparedness plan for what would happen if a novel coronavirus got out of control. And that kind of forward thinking and preparation on the part of the government is, again, what I would like my tax dollars to go to. I don't have the means, and no individual company in this country has the means to prepare a nation to be safe from a national threat. That is one of those things that only the government can do. Research is on that scale, because the kinds of inquiries we need to make to solve national problems cannot be funded by Bill Gates alone or one grant or another. They require all of us to contribute to the kinds of research that benefits all of us when it is successful.
Part of the problem, though, is that the new health secretary is a conspiracist. And the conspiracy surrounding mRNA as a technology that was behind Moderna's vaccine for COVID is something that RFK Jr. has rallied against. And there is this false claim that, mRNA was not properly tested. And, meanwhile, billions of people have been vaccinated with mRNA vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna, and with no side effects at all. And yet this conspiracy has momentum. And as you describe, talking about cancer research and certainly other diseases, that actually the gift that the world was given was authorizing mRNA, which had been in research for decades for commercial use, which now could go on to cure things like cancers, and that is being curtailed because of a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, and these are things that impact people really directly. I know people who had loved ones who were in medical trials for new therapies for cancers which would otherwise be lethal, who now may die because that research has been cut.
Yes.
And I understand that sometimes new things are scary. That's why we have a massive apparatus within our government to thoroughly investigate new things and test them and ascertain their safety at a scale which, again, we cannot entrust to private enterprise. Like if you told me, okay, this company A, totally tested its new product and its internal research tells us that it is perfectly safe to inject into your child. I'm not doing it. I don't care what a company with a profit motive in its own product says about the safety of its product. I want an outside neutral body. And when I say neutral, I mean neutral. I don't mean a body that came into this line of work with serious anti-science skepticism. I want an actually neutral body to thoroughly investigate things from food additives to cancer treatments and actually tell us whether they're safe and have the wherewithal to ban products that aren't safe, even if there's massive corporate pushback. So we don't have that right now. We have, again, a government that's trying to cut itself back as rapidly as possible. And when you erase the staff who would do this kind of inquiry, it's very hard to do the inquiry well. When you erase the funding for this kind of inquiry with outside partners like universities, it's very hard to do this kind of thing well. 75%, roughly. I mean, I would have to double check my stat, but my recollection is that 75% of medical research globally comes from the United States of America. That is something we should be incredibly proud of. The fact that we are driving forward discovery, which impacts people around the world, benefits our population directly, creates jobs, boosts our economy. Like, that's amazing. Do we think all of this research is going to end now that it got defunded by the Trump administration? No, it's not going to end. Other countries are going to fund it. China is going to say to one of our best researchers, hey, pick any university you want anywhere in China. We will guarantee you a 20-year contract.
Yeah.
And then that researcher goes to China and they get the benefit of the research. Will they share it with the rest of the world? I don't know. The U.S. has been amazing for sharing our research with the rest of the world and boosting our global ability to advance as a species. Will other countries be so generous? Can't say. I guess we're going to find out.
We've already found out regarding measles, haven't we, with this outbreak? And we're discovering that so many parents did not vaccinate their children with the MMR vaccine, potentially. I mean, it could have been multiple reasons, but misinformation is certainly one of them. And now this outbreak, which has not been seen in decades, is really taking hold in the United States, spreading from state to state to state. What do you think that serves as a good example as to why public health needs to be done by people who have their heads firmly in reality? And will it change the attitude of parents who haven't really taken it seriously enough?
I hope so. I mean, I don't want anyone to have to learn this lesson the hard way.
Yeah.
I don't want anyone's child to die or come out of a measles episode having lost their hearing or sustained permanent brain damage. Like, nobody wants a family to learn that lesson the hard way. That's why it was so great that we had a completely preventative, decades tested vaccine so that families wouldn't have to learn that lesson the hard way. I am very upset that misinformation has been spread so completely and validated by people with great credibility. Not that I think that they should be given credence on this point, but they've amassed credibility in order to frighten families and cause them to make less strong choices for themselves. Now, I'm a choice girl. I think choice is great, generally. I think there are some things where the threshold is so tilted in one direction. For example, you have a decades-tested, very safe vaccine that prevents a possibly lethal, incredibly contagious illness. I do think that there are arguments in favor of the government saying, look, you just have to do this to protect all of the rest of us. I think pandemic protections are a really tricky area when it comes to navigating the freedom of choice and individual choice. What we're seeing now, though, isn't even really about choice, right? Because we had a secretary of HHS who came in telling us that, don't worry, if you do want to get vaccines, you'll still be able to. Well, except for now, we might not update the COVID vaccine every year, and you might not be able to get it unless you fall into a specific category. Oh, you wanted to get it for your kid? You might not have that choice anymore.
Yeah, pregnant women also not allowed to get it under the new terms. Exactly. And so people will have to either have the means to be able to buy it privately when it could run to hundreds of dollars. And that, again, creates that divide between the wealthy and everybody else.
Absolutely.
This is the direction that it's going. I mean, I'm not seeing any public service announcements about getting a measles vaccine. Have you?
I have not. And I haven't seen any public service announcements about any of the other stuff that RFK Jr. said he was going to do either. Like, I haven't noticed a meaningful improvement in the safety of my food supply. In fact, what I have seen is cuts at the FDA resulting in me getting these like alerts about tomatoes that can kill you with salmonella. Like, I think that I can respect people who have a difference of opinion, who want to see a lot of research and evidence on things that I am comfortable with, but they are not. I get that. When you eradicate staffing in our government, you cannot make America healthy again. You cannot, do even the most modest things about like food dyes effectively. And when you pair that with frightening people about modern medical technology and sending us decades into history at a time, nobody wants to go back in time medically, right? Like, we might want to go back in time for other reasons, but certainly not medically. Sending us back to the Stone Age medically while not even providing any other ancillary benefit in terms of, making our food standards more in line with Europe. We're not getting anything for it. Americans aren't getting anything out of this deal.
Let's talk for a moment about the new travel ban that was announced on Thursday. Trump said that the new ban against a dozen mostly African and Middle Eastern countries can't come soon enough, and argued the ban would help prevent terrorist attacks and keep out those who overstay their visas. All of these countries were majority black and brown population nations. The catalyst for the announcement was the terror attack in Colorado, which was done by an Egyptian national. Egypt does not even appear as one of the nations that is banned from entering the US. So this is riddled with contradictions. I read through the travel ban. It read like an internal memo written by an intern. There was even a line saying that permanent residents are quite difficult to get rid of. I mean, this is what we're dealing with, and yet it has ricocheted around the world because undoubtedly it's going to have a huge effect on America's economy, but it also divides people and segregates nations.
Economically, I have an interesting question about it, I think, which is, who's coming here right now anyway?
Right.
I mean, honestly, we're supposed to host the World Cup next year. And if I didn't live here, I lived somewhere else, and my loved one was thinking of coming to the United States of America for the World Cup, I would say, honey, don't go.
Yeah.
Things are not safe over there. They're going to throw you into some kind of, starvation gulag camp just for trying to enter the country.
Or even just take your phone. People are frightened of having their phone stolen and looked through and going into secondary screening. Even that is very stressful. It
is very stressful to think that in order to enter a country, you might be put in a room for hours of interrogation without counsel.
Yeah.
That is scary. If I said to you, hey, there's a country, but in order to go there, they're probably going to put you in a tiny, brightly lit, really cold room and interrogate you and search your belongings and search all your contacts and search your social media and search your emails and interrogate you for hours and ask you the same question over and over and over again, hoping you'll break. Would you be picturing like North Korea? Like, no, that's here. That's us now.
Yeah.
So number one question is, who wants to come here anyway right now? But when you hold that framing, right, when you accept that we've already put in place the policies that if we wanted to create a strong deterrent to bringing tourist dollars to America, we've created the deterrent. This is really just about ostracizing specific nationalities of people, not even nationalities that were related to a horrifying terrorist event, right? Like, this is about making people think of other people from specific countries as bad and dangerous, even though there is no factual basis for that assertion. Additionally, it's also about undermining claims of asylum. Because, of course, one of the things that makes America a decent country is that when somebody is being persecuted in their home nation for something that we embrace, they can come here to our door and say, if I stay there, I'm going to be killed for exercising this freedom or that freedom which you in America allow. Can I come here and be safe? And in our asylum process, a person can ask that question and can be told yes. When we declare that entire nations of people consist only of individuals so risky that we as a blanket matter cannot allow them to come to our door, we are telling the American public lies about who is coming here, why, and how safe they are.
Not to mention that so much of the crime is done by white male Americans. Rather,
Timothy McVeigh did come to mind when this,
right. Well,
when this happened.
And this is the point, though, isn't it? It's some people are saying that what this really is it plays into the conspiracy theory of the great replacement theory, the white replacement theory, that there is this movement to try and reduce the number of white people, to grow the number of people of color so that the white people become the minority. Trump certainly subscribes to that. Musk certainly subscribes to that. Stephen Miller, who's head of policy, certainly subscribes to that. Not to mention Tom Homan and all of the people on the front line of this. They are all white supremacists. And really, there are so many contradictions in this announcement, this order, that the only thing that really connects all of these countries, cherry-picked countries with no data to support their claims, is racism.
Yeah, there's no factual basis for any of it. I mean, the reason you can come to that conclusion is that when you look at the data, I love looking at the data, you will see that American citizens commit crimes at rates that vastly outstrip non-citizens. Non-citizens are incarcerated at lower rates, and guess what? Undocumented people even lower.
Well, because they want to be able to live here, not going to break the law.
Right? You don't want to get in trouble if you have a document issue. So,
yeah.
You know, we cannot make the argument that non-Americans are more dangerous than Americans. The most dangerous people to Americans are definitely other Americans. Having no data, having no reason to make these claims, being not at war with these nations, really the only explanation one can come up with for policy that exists in an evidence-free bubble is this kind of animus that you're describing.
I've found myself using the term Nazis a lot recently, and I do not use it lightly. But the Nazification of America, so much of what we're seeing, and I'll use the example of Brego Garcia, who was sent to El Salvador, to a kind of terrible place in El Salvador. Initially, he's moved now, but, you know, it's a country that everything seems so random. People are being sent to countries that they don't even have connections with. These are being described as concentration camps, and in many ways, because of the overcrowding and the way that the guards operate, and the fact that there's no chance of any kind of hearing or parole or any of that stuff, you are effectively looking at this kind of very Nazi-style attitude towards the other. And I keep coming back to it in everything that I'm reading and discussing, is that it does seem like the parallels with Nazi Germany are just unquestionable, and it's only going to get worse as I see it.
Terminology aside, I agree with you that what we are seeing absolutely in every possible way echoes the tactics of Nazi Germany. But I don't want to let us off the hook in this one particular way. There's a lot of attention right now on our immigration and prison systems. Those were not invented by Donald Trump. The road here was paved by Democrats and Republicans who were very, very comfortable incarcerating immigrants for having attempted to be here. They were very comfortable separating family, and family separation was not invented by the Trump administration. Families have been separated every day in this country by incarceration for hundreds of years. The fact that our comfort with carceral violence is so high comes from the fact that politicians of both parties increased sentences for minor offenses. I mean, look at California's 3 strikes laws, where you could get thrown in prison for life for stealing a piece of pizza. Now, that has since been reformed, but the point is the way we got here culturally, to the point where Donald Trump could call for people from other places to be thrown in a gulag and have some people cheering for that. The way we got here is like boiling a frog in the water, the boiling water of carceral violence. And I do think that if we're going to move forward from this, people who oppose the way things are right now need to look really critically at the way things were 3 years ago, and the way things were 10 years ago, and the way things were 20 years ago, because there's a lot in our system that allows Donald Trump to exploit it in this manner. And if we want to be safe from that kind of Nazified exploitation down the road, we need to address the foundations of the carceral culture we've built.
There was that phrase that Trump was heard saying on a hot mic, the homegrowns. Mm-hmm. They're next, the homegrowns. You got to build about 5 more places. It's not big enough. He was saying this to the president of El Salvador, who he is effectively subcontracting incarceration to.
Yeah, this weird kind of subcontractor where you pay a guy to incarcerate people, but you can't pay him to bring them back. Very strange contractual relationship there.
Or even facilitate their return.
Yeah, if you can't do it, it's weird.
Yeah.
There are obviously massive legal challenges to the idea of exporting incarceration to other countries, and in this case, without due process. And yet, none of us should assume that was a joke. I think that with this administration, we have seen a testing, right? Something gets floated in a way that's plausibly joking. And then if the joke doesn't receive a massive negative response, actual steps are put in place to test how far things can be taken. That has been done more dramatically, lethally, and terrifyingly by this administration than by anybody else. But again, I mean, when you have a politician who stands up and says, we should have the death penalty for fentanyl selling, I get it. The opioid crisis is incredibly dangerous and has hurt millions of families. But when people cheer for the idea that transgression should be met with violence, that processes should be restricted or fast-tracked, this idea of straight to prison, you do this, straight to prison. When we hear that, that's the root of this plant that we're seeing grow in a horrible, terrifying way. So we need to, I think, listen more critically to the people we don't find as scary as Donald Trump.
Just finally on due process, he did say out loud, well, you can't expect me to have cases for all of these people.
Yeah. Oh, can I nerd out on that for a second?
Sure. I mean, he was referring to, he doesn't obviously know the difference between a legal case that is televised and an immigration hearing that can take 5 minutes.
Exactly.
And he's also not investing in immigration judges, which Biden said was the solution to a lot of the problems at the border. So is that a good place to start?
I mean, first of all, the administrative process in an immigration court is, as you point out, really brief. And I would say, as someone who really loves due process, pretty inadequate. Like when you see children, like a 4-year-old sitting in front of a judge and the 4-year-old doesn't have a lawyer, they just have headphones on to translate what the judge is saying into their language.
Yeah.
We failed as a country. We should not have unrepresented 4-year-olds being dispatched to foreign countries in a 5-minute hearing. And also, historically, we have considered that to be due process. So yeah, Trump is very confused because we have always had due process for everyone in the immigration court system. It is a process which I would argue should be more rigorous. I think many people feel that way. However, there's never been like a logistical reason to just dispatch with the court system and our constitutional rights and fast track people into foreign gulags. It's absolutely feasible to give every single person a hearing. How do I know that? Because that's the way the system has operated for decades. We do, though, need to increase capacity in the criminal court system and in the immigration court system. I think that a better answer would be to diminish inputs, right? To arrest fewer people, to route more things to more appropriate resources. For example, to say that medical needs should be dealt with by medical professionals instead of by prisons and jails. Barring that, though, it is very easy to hire more judges to fund these processes so that people actually do get a day in court, which, as I said before, is a deeply American ideal that we should all treasure. The Constitution, Antonin Scalia has reminded us more than once that the Constitution doesn't just apply to U.S. citizens. It applies to all persons in this country. That's what makes us great, right? Like we have a system that we have decided defines our identity as Americans. Our Constitution defines who we are and what we believe in. And what we believe in is that right is right, no matter where you're from. And if you come here to our country, we will treat you right according to the rules we've established for ourselves. Now, this administration and its movement may want to throw that to the wind, but I don't think that most Americans are willing to set their national identity and their moral compass on fire.
It's good to know that it's so baked in. I mean, Trump was asked what the Bill of Rights meant when he looked at it on the wall in the Oval Office, and he really couldn't describe it. So, I mean, that's unfortunately what we're dealing with.
Did you hear Kristi Noem trying to define habeas corpus?
Yes.
Habeas corpus, which literally in Latin means have the, like, show me the body. Where's the person? Like, if we had an educational system that taught children Latin, people would know what habeas corpus means. But, you know, not only did she not know that habeas corpus is a process through which you can demand that a person's confinement be reviewed by a court.
Well, she said it was designed to protect Donald Trump.
She literally just made up a definition that has nothing to do with anything. The president, does not have a constitutional right to do bad stuff to people, or like whatever it was she said.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe that instead of just having the humility to say, you know what, I don't know what it means.
Yeah.
She made up a new definition that was deeply self-serving and thought that no one would check her on it. Like, habeas corpus isn't an obscure process. It is a core tenet of the Western system of laws.
Well, she was a parking ticket lawyer before she got elevated by Donald Trump. I mean,
there's a lot of good parking ticket lawyers who can define habeas corpus. I encourage you to go ask one.
I'm sure. No disrespect meant. Finally, let's just talk about the relationship between Musk and Trump, which has been hitting the headlines this week. A lesser show might have put it at the beginning of this conversation, but I'm saving it to the end so we can run out of time on purpose. As I see it, obviously this was always going to happen. And that inviting the wealthiest man in the world, who is a known white supremacist and conspiracist, who is not a very nice person, who has a weird history with women and his own children, and has so many complexities, not to mention substance addiction and abuse. To think that he is the savior of America's finances was maybe a foolish move in the first place. This was only going to end in disaster. Two narcissists in a bag. It's not going to end well. So I don't think any of us are surprised, but what's interesting is how Musk has turned on Trump and is using the big, beautiful bill as his catalyst for that.
Yeah, you know what really bugs me? I mean, let the leopards eat each other's faces. I don't know. But we shouldn't have a government where two guys can have a fight and one guy can threaten, like, huge swaths of policy, like pertaining to, like, for example, all electric vehicles. And another guy can threaten, like, one of the core pieces of infrastructure in our fantastic space exploration program. Like, two dudes having a fight shouldn't be able to take billions of dollars of value away from the American people. Yet here they are, not only threatening to do so, but threatening to do so publicly, retributively, in conversation on social media. Like, it's embarrassing. And it's also like, when people say they don't want kings, part of what they mean is they want a government that guards us against the capriciousness of individuals and their anger and their petty grievances and their failed relationships. Like, we don't want to be subject to the king's moods or his breakups. We want a government where decisions are made without those personal grievances in mind. So as satisfying as I'm sure it is for a lot of people to, like, watch this is like Us Weekly playing out, you know, what is Britney versus Paris? Like, it's just, it's not what we want from leadership.
No.
This is very keeping up with the Kardashians, and the Kardashians are fabulous in their own place, but not as a style of governance.
But that's what people really voted for. The reality TV show host and star, he is a kind of cultural icon, and they thought that was good enough. And I think, for my money, this is where we would benefit from having professional politicians do these jobs. And as much as people might hate politicians, you could say what you like about Joe Biden. He wasn't a fascist, and he was a lifelong public servant. And public service is not something that either of these two imbeciles have on their resume.
I mean, I don't even think you need career politicians. You just need professionals. You need people who behave themselves in a way that comports with what we want in a global leader. I do hope that people are getting really tired of having a reality TV style pace in the news cycle. I know that I am personally exhausted all the time. But I also think, there are great leaders who would run this country with the reverence it deserves. I also think that we need to be less deferential to the idea of business leadership. We think that running the country like a business is a good idea. And something I read recently encouraged me to think about the fact that in a business, you don't have to be at all concerned with people's lives or well-being. You can do whatever you need to do to maximize the bottom line. And that's not actually what we want in our government, because so much of government is about caring for people who need care. Someone pointed out to me that it would be better to have the government run like a household, because in a household, you still need to take care of your finances and make sure that you're in the black. But no one is expendable. No one can be cut for cost-saving purposes. No one's safety can be disregarded because every single person matters. And I think that if we turned away from our reverence towards business leadership and cutthroat politics and drama and brio and looked for someone sane and reasonable who is willing to run this country like a good household, I would be very encouraged by that.
I think that hopefully they are proving that point, that America is not a business. And hopefully we will never choose a business leader ever again, let alone not a very good one.
I'd take a good business leader who also runs a good household. I'd accept
there
that.
Is that. There is that. Yeah. And there's a few candidates presenting themselves, certainly on that front. Okay, we have to finish, but I'm so grateful to you. Genuinely, you're one of the smartest and best people I know.
Oh, thanks.
Emily Galvin Almanza, thank you for joining The Weekend Show.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5 Minute News or by joining the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. And I'll come back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.